It started as a routine prisoner transport until one canine blocked the van and refused to move. Officers thought it was just nerves, but when the doors opened and they counted the inmates, something didn't add up. An extra prisoner was sitting inside, and what they uncovered next left everyone frozen. Here's the full story, but real quick. Drop where in the world are you watching in the comments and hit that subscribe button. The sun had just begun to rise above the gray horizon, casting pale light across the correctional facility's parking lot. The morning shift was routine, at least on the surface. A white transport van, reinforced with steel bars across its windows, rolled slowly toward the exit gate. Inside sat several prisoners scheduled for transfer to a higher security block across town. The officers overseeing the transport were seasoned, calm, and prepared. Their focus was on paperwork, head counts, and making sure everything matched the log. To them, it was another day of moving inmates, a system so practiced it felt almost mechanical. Yet sometimes the smallest detail is enough to shatter the illusion of routine. At the final checkpoint before leaving the facility, a uniformed officer with his canine partner, Rex, stepped into position. The dog, a large German Shepherd, had been trained to detect narcotics, explosives, and even the subtle signals of human deception. He was the last line of security before the van was allowed to pass through. As the van approached, Rex's posture stiffened, his tail lowered, his body leaned forward, and his nose pressed into the air. The handler noticed instantly what seemed like just another check turned into something else. The officer gave the hand signal for Rex to circle the vehicle. The shepherd's nails clicked sharply against the concrete as he paced around the van. He paused by the rear doors, sniffed intently, then barked once, low, sharp, and deliberate. His handler frowned. Another lap. Rex's ears stayed pinned forward, his chest tight. By the second round, the barks grew more aggressive, louder, carrying urgency. The prisoners inside shifted restlessly at the sound. Some muttered under their breath, while others leaned forward, pressing against the restraints that bound their hands. Something was wrong. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They opened the inspection log again. Everything matched on paper. The manifest showed the correct number of inmates, the transfer order was signed, and the paperwork had no flaws. But Rex would not stop. He blocked the van's path, standing rigid, barking in short bursts as if warning them not to let the vehicle pass. At first, the sergeant overseeing the checkpoint thought it might be nerves, maybe a false alert. But Rex had never been wrong before. The handler tugged lightly on his leash, trying to redirect him, but the dog refused to budge. Instead, he pressed his nose closer to the rear panel of the van and growled a deep sound that made every officer pause. Finally, the order came down. Open it. The back doors creaked open, the scent of metal and stale air spilling out. Inside, the prisoners sat in their chains, their faces calm, even blank. Nothing unusual at first glance, but Rex jumped instantly, lunging toward the steps of the van, barking furiously now. The officers had to tighten their grips to hold him back. The sergeant raised a hand, signaling everyone to freeze. A head count was ordered, just to calm nerves and confirm the manifest. One officer began pointing down the line, counting in a steady rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. The prisoners watched silently, their eyes darting from Rex to the officers. 5, 6, 7, 8. At the 9th, the officer hesitated, his lips tightening. He glanced back at the manifest. Then he counted again, his voice more strained this time. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time he reached 9 again, a quiet ripple of unease swept through the group. The manifest said there should be 8. There were 9 bodies sitting inside. The sergeant's expression hardened. The air around the van suddenly heavy. None of the inmates reacted visibly, at least not in a way that gave anything away. But the silence was loud. How could there be an extra prisoner? The transport list was strict, signed off by 2 separate officials. Every man inside had been logged when they left the holding block. The gate records confirmed it. And yet, sitting in plain sight was a ninth figure, shackled like the others, blending in perfectly. The officers stepped closer. The stranger kept his head lowered, hair hanging down, face partly obscured by shadow. His orange jumpsuit matched the rest, and his wrists were bound like the others. On the surface he looked no different, but something in his posture felt off. Too still, too calculated. Rex pulled harder on his leash, his growls echoing across the lot. His eyes were locked on the ninth prisoner with an intensity that left no doubt. The sergeant gave the order, "Pull him out." As the officers moved in, one inmate shifted slightly as if trying to shield the figure. Another turned his face away, jaw tight. The ninth man didn't resist. He rose slowly, chains rattling, and stepped down from the van. Rex lunged forward again, barking so aggressively that the handler had to grip both hands around the leash to hold him. The prisoner finally lifted his head. His face was unfamiliar. He wasn't on the roster. He wasn't in the system. The officer stared, the weight of the realization sinking in. Someone had managed to slip into a secured prisoner transport without being logged, processed, or identified. But how? The van had been loaded under supervision. The prisoners had been counted and checked before boarding. The doors had been locked. The logs matched. Every step had been verified. And yet here stood a man who did not belong. The sergeant demanded immediate lockdown. Radios crackled. The prison gates sealed again, alarms buzzing faintly in the background. Rex continued to bark, his teeth bared, as if he knew that this discovery was only the surface of something far deeper. The question now burned through every officer's mind. Who was this man? How did he get inside, and what was his real purpose in being there? The discovery of the ninth prisoner froze the entire lot. Officers tightened the perimeter, forming a half circle around the man in chains. The siren at the facility's main tower let out a warning tone that rattled across the morning air. No one spoke. Even the legitimate prisoners inside the van kept their eyes forward, their silence louder than any protest could have been. The unknown man stood tall despite his restraints. His head was tilted slightly downward, his hair falling over his face. But there was something in the way he carried himself, controlled, deliberate, as though this moment had been anticipated. Rex strained against the leash, his barking echoing in rapid bursts, claws scraping hard against the asphalt. His handler gave firm commands, but the dog refused to relax. It was more than suspicion. He was locked onto something about this man. The sergeant ordered him separated and escorted to a holding cell inside the facility. 4 officers surrounded him as they led him away, Rex pacing at their side, never letting his focus drift. Inside the intake area, the chains were removed just enough for fingerprinting and processing. That was when the first red flag appeared. The scanner beeped, but no record came up. The man's prints weren't in the system, not in the prison database, not in state law enforcement, not in federal files. It was as though he didn't exist. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Everyone expected some kind of match. Even aliases, false records, or expunged files usually left a trace. But this was blank. The sergeant leaned over the desk, his brow furrowed. "Run it again." The technician did. Same result. No record. Meanwhile, Rex sat nearby, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest every time the man shifted. The officers began to question him, asking for his name, his transfer paperwork, his block assignment. The man gave nothing. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't even raise his head fully. He simply sat, his silence deliberate as if words were unnecessary. The silence pressed heavier with each passing second. Finally, one officer retrieved the original transport manifest and began matching faces. 8 confirmed prisoners, all recognizable, all accounted for. The ninth man's face was nowhere on the list. His orange jumpsuit bore a standard issue number. But when they traced it, they found the uniform belonged to another inmate, one who had been transferred months ago. Someone had deliberately recycled it. That realization unsettled everyone. Rex suddenly snapped forward, pulling hard toward the man, barking with raw urgency. His handler tightened his grip, but the dog's strength nearly dragged him off balance. The prisoner finally lifted his head enough for everyone to see his eyes. They weren't the dull, defeated eyes of a convict resigned to routine. They were sharp, calculating, and cold. It wasn't random. He hadn't just wandered into the van. This was planned. The sergeant ordered a sweep of the transport van itself. Officers combed through every inch under seats, inside panels, along the undercarriage. That was when they uncovered another disturbing sign. One of the van's floor panels had been tampered with. Fresh tool marks scarred the metal around the bolts. Beneath it, officers found a hollowed compartment, large enough to hide small packages or even a person during boarding. It was clear now, the man hadn't boarded through official channels. He had slipped in, concealed, and emerged once the prisoners were loaded. But why? The compartment was empty, no contraband, no equipment, no obvious clues, just scratches in the metal and smudges of grease. Enough to show recent use, but not enough to explain his intent. The sergeant replayed the sequence in his head. The van had left the block sealed. Officers had checked and counted. The head count matched then, but not now, which raised another unsettling question. Had there been 9 all along, or had he slipped in during transit? The timeline grew muddy. Meanwhile, Rex remained restless, pacing in circles around the stranger, every muscle tight. He wouldn't sit, wouldn't relax. His behavior told the officers what the evidence couldn't. There was still a threat they hadn't uncovered. One of the senior officers decided to cross-check surveillance footage. Cameras from the block, the loading bay, the van staging area, all reviewed carefully. And that was when the second shock came. On the footage of the loading bay, every inmate was visible as they filed into the van. 8 men, clearly identifiable. The doors closed, the van sealed. The officers double-checked the list against the images. No 9th man, but on the footage captured 15 minutes later at the checkpoint, 9 were seated inside. He hadn't entered during the block transfer. He hadn't entered at the gate. Somehow he had appeared between those 2 points, inside a sealed vehicle under armed escort. The sergeant's mind raced. Was it an inside job? Had someone on the transport team assisted him? Was there a breach in security no one knew about? The pieces weren't adding up. And then another disturbing detail surfaced. One officer recalled a report filed 2 days earlier about missing keys from a maintenance worker who serviced the transport fleet. The worker claimed they'd simply misplaced them. At the time, it was dismissed as human error. Now, with a hidden compartment and an unknown man inside a van, the memory resurfaced with heavy weight. Was it connected? The prison leadership ordered an immediate facility-wide review. Every inmate was checked, every uniform inspected, every tool logged. At the same time, investigators pressed harder against the silent man, but he refused to answer. Rex suddenly lunged again, barking furiously at the man's jumpsuit. This time, when officers searched him more thoroughly, they found a folded piece of thin paper sewn into the lining of the fabric. Inside was a crude but detailed sketch, not of the prison itself, but of the transport route. Every checkpoint, every gate, every timing noted with precision. It wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. It was deliberate reconnaissance. Someone had placed this man on the van to test the system, to probe weaknesses. The question tore through every officer's thoughts at once. If he was only the test, what or who was coming next? And why had Rex locked onto him with such intensity? As though warning them that this wasn't just about one man, but about something much larger. The pieces were starting to form a dangerous picture, but the final connection was still missing. The 9th man sat in his chair, silent, unflinching, eyes cold, waiting as though he knew the next move wasn't his to make. The officers were left with a growing sense that they hadn't stopped the real danger yet. They had only discovered its shadow. The holding cell where the unknown man sat was sealed under maximum watch. 4 guards remained on constant rotation, Rex positioned close by with his handler. The K9 had refused to settle, pacing endlessly, growling whenever the stranger shifted. The prison leadership knew the discovery couldn't be handled quietly. An unregistered prisoner, a compromised transport van, and a hand-drawn map of their route. None of this was coincidence. This wasn't about one man slipping through. It was the start of something larger. Investigators dug deeper. Every movement of the van was analyzed, every officer questioned. That was when another disturbing clue emerged. The officer assigned to maintenance of the transport fleet, who had reported the missing keys days earlier, was suddenly absent. His shift had started at dawn, yet he hadn't checked in. Calls to his residence went unanswered. The timing was too sharp to ignore. A search was ordered immediately. Officers fanned out, combing through service rooms and storage sheds within the prison compound. It was Rex who found the first trail. As his handler guided him past the garage bay, Rex's nose dropped sharply to the floor. He sniffed hard, then barked, pulling toward the far wall. Behind a stack of tires, officers uncovered a maintenance uniform crumpled into a ball. Inside the pocket were the missing keys. The man who had filed the original report wasn't careless, he was complicit. That revelation sent a ripple of shock through the command team. If an insider had helped stage this, then the ninth prisoner hadn't just appeared at random. He was planted deliberately, placed in the van with cooperation from someone within. The sergeant returned to the cell, standing across from the silent figure. He studied him closely now, piecing together what Rex had already sensed. This wasn't a typical convict. He hadn't been caught by mistake. He was disciplined, patient, dangerous. The paper map retrieved from his jumpsuit wasn't just reconnaissance. It was rehearsal. But for what? Hours dragged on. The leadership was under pressure. Answers needed to be found before panic spread beyond the compound. They retraced the van's route, its checkpoints, and its schedule. That's when a chilling realization struck. The van had been scheduled to stop briefly at a regional courthouse before continuing to the high-security block. It was a standard detour logged in the transport manifest, but with an extra man hidden on board, that stop could have turned into a breach point. If the silent prisoner had allies waiting, the courthouse transfer could have been ambushed. The van's reinforced doors could have been forced open. 8 real inmates and 1 planted infiltrator could have spilled into the streets. The plan wasn't escape for one man, it was a mass breakout. And Rex had stopped it before it began. The sergeant stared at the man, the weight of the discovery pressing down. "You weren't meant to get caught here," he muttered under his breath. The man said nothing, but a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as though even in silence he admitted the truth. Rex barked sharply, teeth bared, snapping the tension in the room. The officers knew then what had to be done. The infiltrator was placed under full federal custody. The compromised transport van was sealed and pulled from circulation. Every other vehicle in the fleet was inspected for hidden compartments, every maintenance record reviewed, every uniform accounted for. The inside accomplice was tracked down later that evening, caught attempting to flee the county. Piece by piece, the shadowy plan unraveled. What began as a routine prisoner transfer had nearly become one of the boldest orchestrated escapes in years, and all of it had hinged on that one man, slipping into the system undetected, but he hadn't accounted for Rex. The K-9's refusal to back down, his relentless instinct, and his unwillingness to let the van leave had disrupted everything. Without him, the van would have rolled past the checkpoint, the courthouse stop would have been reached, and chaos would have erupted. Instead, the system held. By nightfall, the compound was calmer. Officers gathered in the lot, the same place where it all began. The van still sat parked under watch, but now the tension was replaced with a sense of relief. Rex sat by his handler, his breathing steady at last. The sergeant approached, resting a hand firmly on the dog's shoulder. There were no words spoken, but the moment carried weight. Every officer knew that the dog's instincts had saved them from disaster. The following day, official statements were released. News spread quickly. What had nearly happened, how it was stopped, and the role Rex played in uncovering it. The courthouse, the prison, and the transport routes all reinforced their security protocols. The infiltration attempt had exposed vulnerabilities, but it had also ensured those cracks were sealed forever. The ninth man remained silent, refusing to speak even under federal questioning. His identity, his affiliations, and his true purpose were never fully revealed. But it no longer mattered. His plan had failed. His silence was powerless now. For the officers, there was only one lasting truth. The dog had seen what paperwork, cameras, and protocols could not. Rex had drawn the line that morning, standing firm in front of the van, and in doing so, he had changed everything. That night, when the compound finally quieted, the handler let Rex rest at his side. The dog's eyes closed slowly, his breathing deep. For the first time that day, he relaxed. And in the silence, every officer who had stood at the checkpoint knew the same thing. The K-9 had been the difference between disaster and safety, between chaos and order, between panic and peace. The mystery of the ninth prisoner ended not with unanswered fear, but with resolution. The van never reached the ambush point. The system was secured. The infiltrator was caught, and the prison returned to order. All because one K-9 refused to let the van pass. And that was the full story. Can you believe how close this came to disaster? The crazy part is, stories like this happen more often than you'd think, and the next one might shock you even more. Don't miss it. Hit like, subscribe, and be here when the next mystery drops.